rain was deafening. It was a torrential downpour that turned the dirt beneath my face into a thick, suffocating sludge. The cold seeped into my bones, but I could not shiver. I could not breathe. My heart was pounding so violently against my ribs I thought it would shatter my chest. Just inches from my face, illuminated by a sudden jagged flash of lightning, were the muddy boots of a predator. He was standing perfectly still, the dull thud of his heavy footsteps having just paused right beside the rusted car I was hiding under. They say the line between life and death is thin, but they never tell you about the monsters willing to crawl back across that line, digging through the dirt and the dark just to drag you down with them. To understand how I ended up freezing in the mud, staring at the feet of a nightmare, we need to go back to the motel. I thought isolation would cure the grief of losing my twin sister. I did not know the silence would only make the footsteps outside my door sound louder. It had been exactly 6 months since Sarah was taken from me. The police called it a random act of violence, a tragic home invasion gone wrong. But I knew better. I felt the void she left behind, a cold, dark emptiness that gnawed at my sanity every single day. I needed to escape the city, the sympathetic looks, the suffocating memories of our shared apartment. So, I packed a single bag and drove until the radio stations turned to static. I found myself at the edge of a forgotten highway, pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Whispering Pines Motel. The name was ironic, considering the only sound was the agonizing buzz of a dying neon sign that flickered a sickly yellow light across the empty lot. The room I rented, room number 4, smelled intensely of rotting wood and damp, moldy carpet. It was a miserable place, but it was isolated. It was safe, or so I desperately tried to tell myself. The first few nights were an exercise in numbing my mind. I would sit on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring into the pitch-black corners of the room, listening to the heavy silence. It was a suffocating quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until you start to hear your own blood rushing. And then, the rain started. It was a slow, deliberate drizzle at first, tapping against the tin roof like bony fingers. I tried to sleep, burying my head beneath the thin, scratchy blankets, but my senses were heightened, paralyzed by an irrational fear I could not explain. That is when I heard it, a slow, agonizing creak of the wooden floorboards out in the narrow hallway. Creak, pause, creak. It was not the wind. The rhythm was too deliberate, too heavy. I held my breath, my blood running completely cold. I told myself it was just an old building settling, just the pipes, just the storm. I closed my eyes tightly, but then a new sound cut through the steady hum of the rain. It was a soft, wet wheezing. It sounded like a dying animal struggling for air, and it was coming from right outside my window. The thin pane of glass was the only thing separating me from whatever was out there in the thick darkness. I lay there, completely frozen, helpless, an icy chill shooting violently down my spine. The wheezing continued, accompanied by a faint, wet scraping against the glass, like someone dragging their nails over the slick surface. I did not sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for the sun. When morning finally broke, gray and miserable, I convinced myself it was all a product of my traumatized mind. Grief does terrible things to the brain. It conjures ghosts out of shadows and monsters out of the wind. I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted, intending to wash my face and pack my bags. I was done with isolation, but as I turned back toward the bed to grab my towel, my heart stopped. The breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. There, resting perfectly in the center of my indented pillow, was a red wool scarf. My vision blurred, a wave of extreme panic crashing over me. It was not my scarf. It was Sarah's. It was the exact scarf she had been wearing the night she was murdered. The police had never found it. How was it here? How was it inside my locked room? My hands trembled uncontrollably as I backed away, bumping into the cold wall. The feeling of being stared at right at the back of my neck was overwhelming. Someone had been inside. Someone had stood over me while I slept, watching me, listening to me breathe. Driven by a terrifying surge of adrenaline, I crept toward the window. I kept my back pressed flat against the peeling wallpaper, moving silently. I reached out a shaking hand and pulled back the edge of the heavy, dust-covered curtain just a fraction of an inch. I peered through the narrow crack into the dismal parking lot. The rain was still falling, casting a dreary haze over everything. And there, standing at the very edge of the tree line, was a figure. A tall, imposing silhouette, cloaked in a dark, heavy raincoat. The hood was pulled up, obscuring any facial features, but the posture was unmistakable. The figure was standing perfectly rigid, facing my window, facing room number 4. Even from that distance, through the rain and the fog, I could feel the weight of those unseen, lifeless eyes burning into my soul. I was entirely cut off from the world, trapped in a decaying motel with a phantom who possessed the belongings of my dead sister. The nightmare had not ended 6 months ago. It had only been waiting in the dark, and now it had found me again. There is a specific, paralyzing kind of terror when you realize you have not been grieving alone. You have not been suffering in private. You have been performing for an audience. I stumbled back from the window. The image of that dark, heavy silhouette burned into my retinas. I needed to leave. I needed to grab my keys and run to the car, but my legs felt like lead. The air inside room number 4 had grown suffocatingly heavy, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. I retreated into the tiny, cramped bathroom, locking the flimsy wooden door behind me, as if that cheap piece of metal could keep the nightmare out. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at my pale, terrified face in the large, silver-flaked mirror. My eyes were wide, bloodshot, completely consumed by dread. I turned on the cold water, the sudden rush deafening in the tight space, splashing it desperately over my face to shock my system back into reality. When I reached for the towel, I froze. The water dripped from my chin, hitting the porcelain with loud, rhythmic plinks. But beneath the sound of the dripping water, beneath the low rumble of the storm outside, there was something else, a mechanical sound, a faint, continuous whirring, followed by a very distinct, sharp click. Click, whir, click. I held my breath, my chest burning, remaining absolutely motionless. The sound was not coming from the pipes. It was coming from inside the wall. It was coming from directly behind the large mirror I was staring into. I leaned in closer, my nose almost touching the cold glass. My eyes scanned the decaying surface, the chipped corners, the dark spots where the silver backing had eroded away. And then I saw it. In the upper right corner, hidden perfectly within a cluster of black, eroded spots, was a tiny, almost imperceptible pinprick of crimson light. It was a glowing red eye, unblinking, staring directly back at me. A camera lens. My stomach violently dropped, a sickening wave of absolute revulsion washing over me. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the scream tearing at my throat. I had not been alone, not for a single second. Every night I had cried myself to sleep. Every moment I had paced the floor in an agonizing panic. Every time I had undressed in the dark, that little red eye had been watching, drinking in my fear. I backed away, my trembling hands slipping on the wet porcelain, my mind spiraling into a chaotic abyss of absolute horror. I needed to know what was on the other side of that wall. The bathroom shared a wall with room number 5, a room the manager had claimed was out of order, permanently locked due to severe water damage. I quietly unlocked my bathroom door and crept back into the main room. I grabbed the heavy iron fire poker resting next to the small decorative fireplace. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely maintain my grip. I stepped out onto the exterior walkway. The rain immediately soaked my clothes, pasting my hair to my face. The wind howled, a low, mourning sound. I approached the door to room number 5. The handle was old, rusted, and firmly locked. But the window, covered by heavy black trash bags taped securely from the inside, had a slight tear near the bottom corner. I pressed my face against the wet glass, peering through the jagged tear into the absolute darkness. A faint, bluish glow illuminated the interior. I raised the heavy iron poker, took a deep, agonizing breath, and smashed it directly through the glass. The sharp crash shattered the heavy silence of the storm. I did not care anymore. I reached through the jagged shards, ignoring the sharp sting as glass sliced my forearm, and blindly unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open, revealing a nightmare draped in a sickly blue light. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, sour sweat, and cheap black coffee. It was not a broken motel room. It was a command center, a shrine. Lined against the far wall were 4 glowing monitors. 2 of them showed white static. The other 2 showed live feeds. One was a wide angle of the desolate parking lot. The other, the one that made my blood run completely cold, was a direct, crystal clear view of room number 4, my unmade bed. The red scarf still resting perfectly on the pillow. The open bathroom door. He had seen everything, but the monitors were not the worst part. The walls, every square inch of the peeling, yellowed wallpaper were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Candids taken from a distance. Me at the grocery store back in the city. Me pumping gas in the dead of night. Me crying violently at Sarah's grave. And right in the center, pinned to the drywall with a large hunting knife, was a newspaper clipping of Sarah's obituary. My trembling hands reached for a thick, leather-bound journal resting on the desk beneath the glowing monitors. I flipped it open, the pages filled with frantic, deeply chaotic handwriting. He detailed my routines, my habits, my most intimate expressions of grief. But as I read the jagged words, the suffocating terror tightened its physical grip on my throat. He was not writing about me. He was writing about Sarah. Every entry, every sick observation, every twisted declaration of unending obsession used her name. He truly believed she had not died. In his deeply disturbed, fractured mind, he had not killed her that horrible night in our apartment. He believed she had simply run away, changed her clothes, tried to hide from him in this desolate place. He thought I was her. The monster who slaughtered my twin sister had followed me into the absolute middle of nowhere, waiting patiently in the dark for the perfect moment to finish what he started. Suddenly, the static on one of the monitors shifted. The camera pointing at the parking lot flickered slightly. I stared at the screen, my entire body going numb, completely paralyzed by an overwhelming surge of primal fear. The tall, dark silhouette I had seen earlier was no longer standing at the distant tree line. The screen showed the empty, rain-slicked asphalt. He was gone. And then, a sound cut through the loud noise of the heavy rain, hitting my ears like a physical blow. The distinct, heavy, wet squelch of a muddy boot stepping heavily onto the wooden planks of the exterior walkway, right outside the open door of room number 5. He was here. You cannot reason with a ghost, and you definitely cannot outrun a monster who knows the exact rhythm of your breathing. I had mere seconds before that massive, dark silhouette stepped through the broken doorway. The small room offered almost no cover, but next to the glowing monitors was a tall, narrow storage closet. I threw myself inside, pulling the louvered door shut just as the heavy, wet boots crossed the threshold. The darkness inside the closet was absolute, smelling strongly of bleach and old dust. I pressed my back against the far wall, bringing my trembling knees to my chest and clamped both hands over my mouth. The air in my lungs burned, demanding to be released. But I knew the slightest sound would be my immediate death sentence. Through the thin wooden slats of the door, I could see the sickly blue light of the monitors cutting across the room. And then, I saw him. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. Water dripped heavily from his dark, oversized raincoat, pooling on the cheap carpet. He was holding something in his right hand, a long, rusted machete, the kind used for clearing thick brush, now hanging casually at his side. He stepped fully into the room, standing completely still in the center of the blue glow. He did not look around frantically. He did not rush. He simply stood there, absorbing the atmosphere of his twisted sanctuary. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a god I had ignored for 6 months, begging for invisibility.
Please let me be invisible.
Then he spoke.
Found you.
His voice was a harsh, raspy
nowhere
whisper,
left to hide.
grinding like rusted metal against stone. He said her name. He said Sarah. He asked why she was hiding from him again. He told the empty room that he had been so patient, that he had waited in the dark, watching her cry, watching her pretend to be someone else. The sheer insanity of his words sent a paralyzing shockwave through my entire nervous system. He truly believed I was her. He believed my grief over my sister was just an act to deceive him. He began to pace the room, the heavy thud of his boots vibrating through the floorboards directly into my spine. Thud, squelch, thud, squelch. He approached the monitors. I watched through the slats as he reached out a massive gloved hand and gently touched the screen showing my empty bedroom. He whispered that he left the red scarf as a gift, a reminder of the night they were supposed to be together forever. The smell of his presence seeped into the closet. It was a horrifying mixture of wet earth, stale sweat, and dried metallic copper, blood.
He's dead.
The realization that he had
manager
likely
is
killed
dead.
the motel
What am I
manager
gonna-
to secure this hidden room hit me with agonizing clarity. I was entirely alone. No one was coming to help. No one even knew I was here. He slowly turned away from the monitors, his hidden face sweeping across the room. The thick hood of his raincoat obscured his eyes, but I felt the exact moment his gaze locked onto the louvered closet door. The silence in the room became thick, suffocating, completely unbearable. The rhythmic sound of his boots stopped. He was staring right at my hiding place. A low, guttural chuckle erupted from his throat, a sound completely devoid of any human empathy. He took a slow step toward the closet. The wooden floor screamed in protest under his weight. Another step. He raised the rusted machete, the dull metal catching the blue light of the monitors. He was going to hack through the door. He was going to chop me to pieces in this tiny, dark box. Adrenaline, pure and unadulterated, exploded in my veins. It was the primal instinct of a hunted animal cornered in the dark. I could not die like Sarah. I could not let him take my life in this miserable, forgotten place. As he raised the blade high above his head, preparing to bring it crashing down, I threw my entire body weight forward. I burst out of the closet, the louvered doors exploding outward. The sudden, violent impact threw him off balance. He stumbled backward, the machete swinging wildly, slicing through the air just inches from my face. I did not look back. I scrambled over the desk, my hands slipping on the scattered photographs, and threw myself through the broken window I had smashed earlier. The jagged glass tore at my jeans, deeply slicing my thigh, but the blinding panic masked the pain completely. I hit the wooden walkway hard, rolling onto the flooded parking lot. The rain was a torrential sheet of freezing water, blinding me instantly. The mud sucked at my shoes, trying to pull me down into the earth. I scrambled to my feet, slipping and sliding in the sludge, running blindly toward the back of the motel. I heard a furious roar of pure rage erupt from room number 5. The sound of his heavy boots hitting the wooden walkway echoed like gunshots in the storm. He was fast, terrifyingly fast. I sprinted toward a row of rusted, abandoned cars parked near the edge of the dense tree line. The darkness there was absolute. a solid wall of black pine trees thrashing violently in the heavy wind. I threw myself into the thick mud, sliding desperately beneath the chassis of an old decaying truck. The space was incredibly tight, the rusted undercarriage pressing painfully against my back. I lay flat on my stomach, my face buried in the freezing mud, completely surrounded by the suffocating smell of gasoline and rotting leaves. The rain battered the metal roof above me, creating a deafening drumbeat of pure terror. I clamped both hands tightly over my mouth, desperately trying to quiet my violently ragged breathing. Every muscle in my body was screaming in agony, trembling uncontrollably from the freezing cold and the absolute dread. Then, the footsteps approached, the heavy, wet squelch of his boots moving deliberately through the mud. He was not running anymore. He was stalking. He knew I was trapped. The boots entered my limited field of vision, large, dark, covered in thick red clay. They stopped just inches from my face. I could see the frayed laces, the deep grooves in the thick rubber soles. He stood perfectly still, towering over the rusted truck. I was trapped in the exact moment I described at the very beginning of this nightmare. The lightning flashed, illuminating the terrifying proximity of his boots. The thunder rolled, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. He was waiting, listening. I could hear his heavy, wet wheezing above the sound of the storm. He slowly dragged the tip of the rusted machete along the side of the truck, the screeching metal creating a sound that made my teeth physically ache. He whispered her name again, his voice dropping to a sickeningly sweet, mocking tone. He asked her to come out and play. He promised it would not hurt this time. He promised they would be together forever. Tears of absolute hopeless despair mixed with the freezing mud on my face. My lungs were burning, screaming for oxygen. I knew if I stayed under here, he would eventually crouch down. He would see my eyes shining in the dark. He would drag me out by my hair into the freezing rain. I had to make a move. I had to risk everything on one desperate final gamble. I slowly, agonizingly, reached my hand out to the side. My fingers brushed against a large, heavy rock embedded in the thick mud. I gripped it tightly, the rough surface digging into my frozen skin. I took a deep, silent breath, preparing my muscles for the explosion of movement. With all the remaining strength I possessed in my exhausted body, I threw the heavy rock as far as I could toward the dense tree line. It crashed through the thick branches, snapping twigs loudly in the dark. The reaction was instantaneous. The heavy boots pivoted violently toward the sound. He charged toward the trees, the heavy thud of his steps moving away from the truck. This was it, my only chance. I scrambled out from under the opposite side of the rusted vehicle, leaving my soaked jacket snagged on a piece of jagged metal. I did not care. I sprinted toward the distant glow of the lonely highway. My lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. Every step sent a jolt of agonizing pain up my sliced leg, but the sheer terror propelled me forward. I did not look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the dim yellow glow of a distant street lamp fighting against the raging storm. The asphalt of the highway finally met my torn shoes. I ran directly into the center of the road, waving my arms frantically, screaming until my throat bled. For what felt like an eternity, there was only the storm, and then a miracle. The bright, blinding headlights of an 18-wheeler pierced through the heavy rain. The massive truck slammed on its brakes, the air horns blaring, coming to a skidding halt just feet away from me. The driver threw open the door, his face a mask of absolute shock as he looked at my bloodied, mud-covered, terrified form. I scrambled into the high cab, locking the heavy door behind me, collapsing violently onto the passenger seat. I screamed at him to drive. I screamed that he was coming. The driver slammed on the gas, the massive engine roaring as we sped away from the Whispering Pines Motel, leaving the nightmare behind in the blinding rain. The police raided the motel 3 hours later.
We've got movement
They
on camera
found the
4.
hidden room. They found the photographs, The monitors, the deeply disturbed journal detailing his psychotic obsession. They found the manager's body stuffed inside a rusted oil drum behind the building, but they did not find him. The monster who murdered my sister, the phantom who had watched me sleep, had vanished back into the heavy woods, swallowed completely by the storm. He was gone, leaving only his muddy footprints and a trail of unimaginable trauma. I am physically safe now. I live in a high-rise apartment with a state-of-the-art security system. I have 3 deadbolts on my heavy steel door. I never open my windows, not even on the hottest days of summer. But the psychological scars are permanent, running far deeper than any physical wound he could have inflicted. The silence of the night is no longer a comfort. It is a terrifying canvas where my mind paints the darkest, most agonizing possibilities. Every time the wind rattles the glass, every time the floorboards settle in the hallway, my heart stops. My blood runs completely cold. I find myself staring at the vents, checking behind the mirrors, looking for that tiny, unblinking red eye in the dark. They tell me I survived. They tell me I should move on. But you cannot simply move on when you know, with absolute certainty, that monsters do not stay buried. They adapt. They hide in the shadows of the mundane. They wait patiently in the spaces between the walls, listening to your breathing, waiting for the perfect moment to step out of the dark. When you look in the mirror tonight, in the quiet solitude of your perfectly safe home, I want you to ask yourself one chilling question.
Looking back at me?
Is it only your own eyes staring back? Or is there someone standing just out of sight, smiling in the dark, waiting for you to turn out the lights? If you have ever felt that cold, heavy presence watching you from the shadows, share your story in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to Lost Horror to keep the nightmare alive. The story I have for you next week will make you terrified to ever close your eyes again. Sleep tight.